Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for those people who have their natal Saturn in the first house of the self. Saturn is the lord of karma, also described as the taskmaster. And this is the teacher who demands so much of you when it comes to learning the lessons in this incarnation. And the house that he rules is the 10th house of career and public reputation. So those kinds of themes, one's ambition, authority figures are connected to Saturn. And, so the house of career, also the pecking order of the social structures, as they call them. And it's about being responsible, being disciplined, having structure. Duty is connected to Saturn, but also it can be like obstacles and hardships. So the first house is the house of the self. It can be the physical appearance. It can be when you come into this, it's part of childhood actually. Coming from that womb, if you think of the 12th house as the womb, and what's the first thing that you are met with as a baby? And we have Saturn here. Now, this can also be if somebody has Capricorn as their ascendant or their rising sign, because then Saturn is their ruler. So, let's say you have Sagittarius rising and Jupiter is therefore your ruler, but you have Saturn in the first house. It's going to be kind of interesting because Saturn and Jupiter are quite different, and they both are going to influence you. It's possible that depending on how far away Saturn is from the ascendant, it may not be so much your appearance as your demeanor, because this is how other people see you before they really know you, deeply. So one of the things that I put down here is that if you have this placement, you might have been a parentified child. So I gathered information from several sources. I should acknowledge, I usually give a shout out, but I just was kind of looking around and I just forgot. So one of them said, was talking about having, I put down heavy responsibilities as a young child. And then I wrote, I typed out parentified child, because that's really the term that they use when they're talking about these family systems. I've read a lot of books in my years about dysfunctional families and that kind of thing. And adult children of alcoholics, for instance, is where you can find, even if you don't have parents who had that issue, you still can find a lot of like a wealth of information about family systems. And the parentified child is when the child has to grow up too soon. And this can happen for a number of reasons. When Saturn is in the first house, to me, it's almost like the universe is kind of just throwing the child into this void. I know people who have this placement, and in one specific case, I saw the child growing up, and the lack of what they should have had. Now, they may have been clothed, they might have been fed, but I could see that there was something missing. And they know that there's something missing. There's a coldness in that household. And that person's going to have that coldness too a lot of times. So if you have this placement, you may feel like, even if your sun is in Leo, your rising sign, and I don't know, whatever your rising sign is, but if you have Saturn in the first house, you may have a coolness, a coldness to you that others may find off-putting sometimes, and it may actually prevent you from making friends or being able to, like, even if you're trying to date and things like that, you may feel kind of inhibited, but also you may give off a vibe that is very, you know, I don't want to say unfriendly, but it is, if we talk about being cold, it can be like that, like very reserved and overly serious. That's one of the big things that you're going to have to contend with, is that you have an overly serious demeanor. A lot of times, even if your sun is in Gemini, and people tend, I'm thinking of signs that people tend to be carefree. Now, I do think that depending on the rising sign, this can be modified. So if your rising sign is Leo or your rising sign is Gemini, you may be a lot more, able to joke about things or be warm and things like that. Perhaps the coldness only comes out in certain circumstances when you feel a little bit unsure of yourself and you try to hide behind this facade that can be quite, I think it can be quite intimidating for other people. And it can fool them into thinking that you have this high self-esteem because Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn. And so it's like having Capricorn rising to have it in this first house, especially if it's closer to the ascendant, forms a conjunction with the ascendant. But the well put together person who's very professional and gives off a vibe of being very competent and a go-getter, that type of person can hide their insecurities, but they may have them in spades. One thing you're going to have to do is to shake off negativity, because you may have that sort of attitude, and this may come from a childhood that wasn't very fun. And especially if you had to grow up too soon and you lost that inner child, you may be the kind of person who doesn't laugh much and who, like I said, is very reserved. And if you're not careful, you might be even like a curmudgeon, where you're just very, you have a bit of a pessimistic streak, and I hope I said pessimistic streak in you that makes you a lot more dour. I think that's a good word to describe sometimes Capricorn and or Saturn, and somebody who has this on the ascendant. So what else? Well, going back to how you may have been raised, because you may have had, been placed, responsibilities may have been placed on you at a young age, that can give a child a sense of resourcefulness and relying on the self. And that can have a good side to it for sure, because that can actually lend itself to success when, the child grows up. But that doesn't mean that those wounds can get healed just because you become successful in the world. So you might still have some of those feelings of even trauma if you were not allowed to be a child and allowed to be carefree, and if you had heavy responsibilities. And I will say too that depending on what your sun sign and other factors, if you were kind of like saddled with a lot of responsibilities, I could honestly see in some cases you rebelling as a teenager or as an adult if you have to wait until you leave home. Maybe even if you really achieve, if you're an overachiever and you go to college, that might be the time when when the what hits the fan, and then all of a sudden you regress. And it's really not you regressing, you're trying to make up for lost time is what it is. And so you might go a little haywire, being a party animal or something like that. I'm not saying it's just something that occurred to me while I was doing this, is that in some cases it could cause the young person to rebel at a certain point. You might be a late bloomer. And, they were talking about that there's a strange thing about Saturn, that the person gets younger as they get older. And that's true of Capricorns. I've told that to Capricorns before, that they get younger as they get older because they begin to let go, especially if they've already achieved their ambitions, their goals. They can relax, they can take a breather, and then they can just enjoy life from that vantage point of knowing that they have done what they set out to do. And I think that's a really great thing, that because, there's that saying, youth is wasted on the young. Saturn is about old age and time, father time. So the point being that sometimes enjoying the fruits of your labor coming at middle age can be sweeter than if you are trying to enjoy things when you're a lot younger and you're a lot less wise. And you're kind of like, probably taking things for granted because you don't know what it's like to not have these things. And so I think sometimes it's easier to appreciate things when you're older. I know when I went back to university in my 30s, I was really able to enjoy it. I wasn't just thinking of it as a means to an end. And if you're somebody who is a Saturn in the first house person, there might be a lot of things that if you didn't get a chance to do them, like maybe going to college, that you really want to do eventually. And there's a chance that you might actually appreciate it more because you have more, life experience to compare it to. And maybe it makes you more grateful. So sometimes people like you don't have friends. And I think one of the reasons for this is because if you are very inhibited and if you are overly serious, and maybe even a little bit critical of people, judgmental of them, because you're thinking that, they don't have responsibility. You're just like looking at it from the point of view of what how a Capricorn person thinks and giving off that vibe, that might not make you inviting to other people. So try to, think about how you are coming across to people, especially if you're somebody who is looking for love and you have this in the first house. What are the first impressions that you are making? Perhaps you are putting people off with a kind of dour personality that is a bit of a Debbie Downer situation, because other people may just want to relax and enjoy themselves without having somebody scrutinizing them or, questioning their behavior. You could have had a parent who was an authoritarian. You might have been raised very strictly. That's not going to be true across the board, but it could be, because Saturn is a ruler of that 10th house, and that's about authority figures. So you might have a parent like that who's, one thing I didn't see, of course I didn't read all the sites, but I would even believe that in some cases you may be raised in a household where there's a lot of success, and it's being put on you to kind of make the family look good. So even having a prominent parent in the kind of field where the family is an extension of that adult. So a perfect example is having a parent who's in politics. And the wife, well, I said wife as though all politicians are men, which they aren't. The spouse and the children have to kind of put on this show when a politician is running for office or even in office. They have to kind of, watch what they do, because there might be a lot of people looking and scrutinizing. And, same thing with a minister's daughter or, child. The minister, he wants his parishioners to see the, how he raises his family. And, if it doesn't work out, then they're going to think that he's a bogus minister. If the children are getting into trouble with the law or what have you, or if they're swearing, not seeming to follow the teachings of the pastor, the parishioners might say, wow, he's really not a good parent, or why doesn't he do this with his children? So if you had some kind of situation in that vein, you might have felt like you couldn't just be yourself. It's very important for you to be authentic. And this just goes across the board, not just so that you can advance in your career. No, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about just being willing to be who you are. That sense of realism. Because I looked up about karmic astrology, and they said that this could be that someone in a past life was very vain, very shallow, going back to this idea of the appearance. And they have to be kind of humbled. And I thought I read at some point, not in, right before I did this, but in the past, I thought I read something about Saturn in the first, that the person could have some kind of physical disability. And I still think that's possible. That limits their body in some way, because the first house can be the body. So again, that might be that sense of vanity, that in a past life where the person felt better than other people because of the way that they looked, now they have to struggle with being judged because of how they look or what have you. And this forces you to become more positive, which is what you really must do to counter those tendencies that you might have. Yeah, I think I covered it. I hope that you enjoyed this. I really do. I hope that resonated with you. If you would like a personal reading, where I look at not just Saturn, what house it's in, but other planets, and just kind of synthesize information to create what I see as your personality traits and patterns and whatnot. I have different types of readings. You can check me out at rainandmoonastrology.com. The link is below. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye.